It was sometime in July when I decided to go on an impromptu solo road trip for a day. I'm fairly into sightseeing, and there was a couple of somewhat nearby places I still wanted to cross off my bucket list before going back to college in August. The plan was to wake up early to start the road trip, then see a few different places during the day, and finally start the trip back home sometime around 9 p.m. or so. I figured this way I can maximize my time without having to pay for a hotel or anything. The trip was fine. It was the trip back that was a different story. I ended up leaving around 10 p.m. Apple Maps estimated it would take about 4.5 hours to get back home. I had done about half that when I was starting to get tired, like to the point where it was becoming dangerous to drive. I tell myself the next rest stop I saw, I'd stop and take an hour's nap before continuing. That way I could still get home at a decent time. So I did just that. I saw a rest stop and pulled into the parking lot. The first thing I noticed was the lack of cars. The place was completely empty, and it had not been for some lights. I would have thought the place was abandoned. But I guess this made sense. I mean, it was really late. Anyway, I leaned back in my seat and set an alarm to go off in an hour. Fast forward to when it did go off and I realized I had to go inside, as now I have to use the bathroom. I started walking to the building. When I got inside, I found the bathrooms and opened one of the stalls. I was in there for not even 30 seconds when I could suddenly hear someone talking outside the bathrooms and in the hallway. This shocked me as I didn't even hear the main door open. My car was the only one in the parking lot just a minute ago. I didn't see how anyone could have been in here. That's when the bathroom door opens. I was a bit on edge, but I realized it was most likely just another regular person that I somehow didn't notice. I was ready to leave when I heard slight knocks on the stall door. I awkwardly responded with, someone's in here." No response. It was complete silence. I was a bit more on the edge now, so I decided to stand in the stall until he left. That's when I noticed an eye looking through the crack in the stall's door. As we made eye contact, the guy started screaming and relentlessly beating his head against the door. Thinking quickly, I used my whole body to bash into the door, bursting it open and knocking the guy off his feet. I proceeded to run as fast as I could and out of the bathroom and outside towards my car. I was about halfway through when I heard the main door burst open behind me. This guy was chasing me. Finally, I got to my car and started backing up, but the guy caught up to me and managed to slam his body into my car as I sped off. I looked into my rearview mirror as I got further away, I saw the guy get up like it was nothing and just stand there looking in my direction. I was beyond shaken up. I couldn't process what just happened. I honestly didn't know what to think. You always hear about crazy stories like this, but never once think it will actually happen to you. I probably drove over the speed limit the rest of the way home. Needless to say, I wouldn't be falling asleep driving. I was now completely filled with adrenaline. I still have no idea who that guy was, where he even came from, or what his problem was. A few years back, I was traveling across the country to visit my parents. This is something that I did all the time. It was a really long drive and usually took 2 days to get there. But I drive on road trips all the time. I've driven all around the country, and I've always liked exploring. I usually have always slept in my car as well. And I even lived in my car for a period of almost 6 months at one time. Not because I couldn't afford a place, but because it was something I just wanted to do at the time. It was never that difficult for me because I'm 5'1" female in the back seats of my 2010 Subaru gives me plenty of space to sleep comfortably. On this particular road trip, I was driving from California to Illinois. I usually would take about 3 days to drive there and would stop at rest stops or truck stops to sleep. I was on the first night of the road trip and had driven for almost a whole day. It was getting late, probably around 11 p.m. I found a rest stop and pulled off the road into it. When I got there, I could see it wasn't too busy, but there was a fair amount of people there, mostly a lot of truckers. I found a parking area and parked away from the handful of cars that were there. I was all the way up one end, and I prepared my car for sleeping. I had a system that I would always do, which was cover all my windows with blankets or window covers and secure them. I would then get my blankets in the back seat for sleeping. Then I went inside the rest stop building to use the restroom and brush my teeth. When I went inside, I saw there were a few other people there, but not too many. With it being late, I wanted to hit the road by 6 a.m. the next morning. So when I got back to my car, I pretty much tried to go right to sleep immediately. I'd been tired from all the driving, and within 5 minutes I was super relaxed and drifted off to sleep. However, I woke up seemingly not too long after that. I was suddenly wide awake and looked around, and saw that it was still nighttime. I looked at my phone to see the time. It was nearly midnight. I hadn't even been asleep for an hour. Then I thought I heard a very small noise, but I couldn't tell what it was. I was paranoid for some reason. I had slept in my car many times before, but I never felt quite like this. I was completely still and held my breath listening. Then I heard a small noise once again. I was trying to figure out what it was. Then I realized it was my rear passenger's door that my feet were up against. It was being pulled from the outside. It was as if somebody was trying to open the door, very slowly and quietly. I heard it once more and my heart started pounding. Then I thought I heard some footsteps, just barely, and everything went quiet. I'm still laying there frozen, not making a sound. Eventually, maybe 2 minutes later, I heard more noise. This time somebody tried opening my other rear door where my head was. I very carefully and slowly sat up and pulled the blanket covering the window to the side, just a tiny bit. I saw a man walking from the side of my car towards the front of it, away from me. I only saw him from the back, so I didn't know who he was, but I quickly closed the tiny gap I had made and hoped the man was leaving for good. I kept sitting there and listening, but I didn't hear any noises for a while. Just when I was starting to feel a little bit more comfortable again, I heard another noise. This time it was coming from my front driver's door. It sounded like the guy was messing around with the lock on my driver's door or something. I knew that all my doors were locked, and I was just hoping that the guy would give up already and go away. I wanted to drive away at this point, and I looked around for my keys, which usually would be in the compartment behind the driver's seat and would be next to me as I slept in the dark. I had a hard time finding it, and I was trying to be as quiet as I could. Just then, before I even found my keys, I suddenly heard a click from my driver's door, as if it came unlocked. Then I watched the door open up. I was horrified. I saw a man begin to enter the car and look right at me. When I saw him, I recognized him. He was one of the people I'd seen inside the rest stop when I was there. When he saw me begin to come closer, and I went as far back in the corner of my back seat as I could. The man started laughing as he got inside and then shut the driver's door. I pushed the unlock button on my door and then opened it. I ran out as quickly as I could, and I heard the man open his door as well. I went running all the way to the rest stop. I felt the man chasing after me, and he was gaining on me until I got about 5 feet away from the rest stop building. Then he seemed to stop. As soon as I found somebody walking at the rest stop, I ran up to them and I told them to call the police. Then I went inside. There were not many people inside the rest stop at all anymore at this time. but still enough to make me feel much safer than out of my car. I didn't have my phone with me or my keys. They were both still inside my car. So I walked up to the front desk of the convenience store area inside the rest stop, and I asked the person working there to call the police. I told him what happened, and I then waited by the front counter until the police arrived. When they got there, we went back to my car and saw that the man was gone. Luckily, he hadn't stolen any of my stuff, and I provided the police with his description and told them that I had seen him inside in case there were security cameras. After that night, I stayed the next night in a hotel and did the same on the way back. I've slept in my car again since then, but I've been much more careful when I do. This didn't happen to me, but rather to my mom and dad during their honeymoon. At this time of the story, my mom and dad lived in Florida, and this was around the summer of 1989. Both my parents resided in Cocoa Beach and were planning on taking a weekend trip down to the Florida Keys. My mom loved the beaches and my dad loved the weather. As the story goes, they had left on Thursday afternoon and would be there for the rest of the weekend. It was that Thursday evening when they were driving in a deserted road surrounded by forest on both sides. Now there's barely anybody on this road, and that's when my dad slows down when he sees something on the side of the road. About 20 feet away is a large white man with his headlights turned on. He then sees two men jump out of the van and begin to flag down my parents. Thinking that they might have needed help, my dad pulls over to the side of the road and gets down from the car with my mom. The two men slowly approach the car, wearing what appeared to be black clothing, with the word police on the back of their shirts. At first, my parents thought that they could have been highway patrol or something, but they would soon find out that wasn't the case. They go up to my dad and say, "Hi there, we're police officers. It appears you are going above the speed limit, and we're going to have to fine you for that." Then they presented a piece of paper to my parents, as I guess some sort of identification. Almost immediately, my dad caught onto the fact that they were most certainly not police officers. For one, their van was an unmarked vehicle. They seemed a bit too young, and the uniforms they were wearing didn't really resemble that of a police officer. As a matter of fact, it looked more closely related to casual security attire. My dad confronted them about this, and they had claimed they were under-equipped. However, my dad wasn't buying it and went back to his car. No matter how hard they tried to claim that my parents were being arrested, they weren't buying it. At this point, the two men began knocking on the car windows, now demanding for my mom and dad to step out of the vehicle. One of them takes out a window breaker and proceeds to smash the window on my mom's side of the car. My dad thankfully floors it down the road, but not before flipping them off. He ended up driving a little faster, fearing that they would somehow catch up to them, but they thankfully never did. Nobody got hurt, but it was one of the scariest and weirdest encounters my parents had ever come across.